Watcher Boy's dead. If that's what happens to our imaginary friend, what happens to us?
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in episode 6 of Gen V. I gotta say, this show's great, and it's flying way too far under the radar. Like, I'm actually getting more invested in these characters than I am some of the characters in The Boys. This is the best X-Men story we've had in years.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'll explain in just a little bit. And everybody, check out our God You t-shirts at our merch store. The link for that is in our merch shelf below. Now, let's jump into this episode.
Let's go, girls.
It is titled Jumanji for a few different reasons. One, a few episodes ago, Kate made Rufus hit himself in the groin while saying this word.
And every time you swing, yell Jumanji.
Jumanji! And also, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Jumanji movie franchise. In the films, people play a game that pulls them into another universe where they traverse a dangerous wilderness and fight monsters. This is similar to what happens in this episode. The characters are pulled into the woods of Kate's mind, a dangerous wilderness in a way. And they have to fight a monster, the memory of Luke, as powered by the guilt that Andre and Kate feel for betraying him. Now, the woods in the dream have a few layered meanings as well. Obviously, the woods are the source of Kate's greatest trauma, the story she told us.
I grabbed him by the arm and I told him to go away and never come back. So he did. He just walked right into the woods. That was the first time my power showed up.
This is her core memory that defines the trauma that she will experience for the rest of her life. So for her, this memory of the woods informs every other memory she has, which is why the Gen V kids have to journey through the woods to reach separate memories. But they are also technically all asleep in a dreamlike state, and dreams about the woods often symbolize a loss of control and a fear of the unknown. Kate lost control of her powers at a young age. She can't stop hearing people's voices, and she lives in constant fear of losing control, which is why she wears gloves even when she has control over her abilities. It's also important that the woods that are under the school are the source of everybody's problems. These underground woods house the dark secret of this school, that an institution of education does not actually exist to help teenagers, it exists as a means to control them. In the same way, most universities in real life have become an assembly line, taking kids' money, forcing them to rack up large student debt so they can become indebted members of society who just want to go to work and not question the system that they have now paid into. So that's the overarching theme of this episode, and I'm going to point out a bunch of little details along the way that augment and support this theme. The episode begins with us looking into Kate's eyes as she makes her friends remember, and the episode ends with those same eyes being destroyed and bloodshot. Now look, this is actually a real condition, when someone can become so stressed that the capillaries in their eyes just explode and you can cry blood. The Bible even says that Jesus sweat blood in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before his arrest. So bleeding like this is always symbolically seen as a sign of catharsis, of shedding old traumas that haunt you to prepare for a new awakening, which Kate experiences in this episode. But she can only do this with the help of her friends, other broken people who have experienced similar guilt and trauma.
I'm f***ed up. The thing that is really apparent now is that we are all f***ed up.
I don't want to wake up.
And this is one reason this show feels like an adaptation of the X-Men. The X-Men are all freaks and weirdos, but together they become whole. They become a family. And I should also note that in the Boys comics, Godolkin was originally a parody of the X-Men comics, with various G teams actually being a cover for an extensive pedophilia ring.
Yeah, this show's way better than the comic.
Yep, I love Garth Ennis, but I totally agree. So let's point out a few surface details and walk through this episode. There's a poster on the wall here for Girls Get It Done, and that poster's placement is deeply ironic. This moment in Dawn of the Seven and their entire marketing campaign was meant to capitalize on the ideal of female empowerment.
Girls get it done.
But Dusty doesn't care about female empowerment. He just hung the poster on the wall because they're sexy superheroes, which, let's face it, is always what Vought intended. Now, to hit this point home, there's also a poster in the basement for Dawn of the Seven, and later we can see that somebody drew a nude lady on it. And here we see a Homelander poster, and later on here one for Black Noir. Also, I think this American flag on the wall is really supposed to be Homelander's cape. And I also appreciated the design flourishes in this scene that so many things in the basement are made from beer pong solo cups, like the banner hanging from the ceiling and also this entire light fixture.
Yeah, you know, the set dressers on these shows, they're just top notch.
Top notch, I agree. At the start, they're freaking out. Marie says,
Didn't you learn CPR?
Where?
At superhero school? Jesus!
now this is a fun dig at God U, which teaches its students how to maintain social media profiles, but not how to save actual human lives. Marie saves Kate's life by speeding up her pulse, again proving that she is probably the most powerful supe we have seen in this universe, the person who could probably kill Homelander one day. But even she will not be able to stop the super virus that Dean Shetty is creating. creating. I'm going to talk about that ending and what the Dean really wants a little later in the video. Now, back in Kate's memories, we get this effect of reality dismantling and disintegrating, very similar to the in-camera effects used in the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And then we get the amazing return of Jensen Ackles as Soldier Boy, but he is playing a version of himself from Kate's memories, so he is acting like characters that he played in movies like Red Thunder 2.
If you hurt a hair on either of their heads, I'll kill every last one of you commie bastards.
Now, this is why later on he insists that he is not a communist.
I'm no godless commie.
Because in those 80s movies, Russia was still a communist state. And he says this after Andre brings up that he is a Russian agent.
A Russian agent is what you are.
Because remember, this was the cover story that Vought came up with for the events at the end of Boys Season 3.
She made the ultimate sacrifice when she stopped the Russian radicalized Soldier Boy.
Now, Soldier Boy is a parody of Captain America. Note his triangular shield, just like Cap's original shield, which is also the same shield that Soldier Boy had in the comics. But even the musical theme that plays here is very similar to the first Avenger theme.
Doing it here.
What in the
Soldier Boy?
Now, in The Boys, he was presumed dead for years, but he was actually in a Russian lab, very similar to Bucky Barnes in The Winter Soldier. And that's how Vought was able to spin the cover story that he was now a Russian agent. And when he runs through all the different terms for Kate's personal habits, my favorite one was this.
She'd crank up the Jonas Brothers.
Because those boys were teen heartthrobs when she was a tweener. Now, back at the movie theater, there's some very cool Easter eggs. Sam is eating candy called Vought Tot Twist with a puppet on it, foreshadowing the weirdest scene that any intimacy coordinator has ever had to work on. Notice that he's in front of a polarity claw machine. I guess the draw here is that polarity has magnetic powers, so that would make it easier to reach in and get a toy. Notice though that it also has Funko Pops, which is blurry, but I believe they are also of polarity. And there are lots of posters on the wall and movies for sale at this drive-in. Now, some of these movies are also posters we see in Kate's room later on, where we get a better look at them. This is a poster for Red Thunder 2, followed by some kind of romantic comedy with Soldier Boy and the Crimson Countess. We see this poster in Kate's room later, and it seems modeled after many 80s movies, like When Harry Met Sally or Arthur 2, on the Rocks. Area 51 poster right next to it is another polarity movie that Andre mentioned in a different episode.
When I was alone, I used to watch his Area 51 movies over and over again.
The poster on the far right here is from the Payback movie, and this movie in the prize machine is for the Crimson Countess hit Whiskey Sunrise. And we also see a poster for that in Kate's room. And then we get an actual tender, intimate moment for a sexual experience, something we never get in this universe. That is, until Emma becomes a puppet. The song playing here is Wolf Alice's Don't Delete the Kisses. Appropriate since Emma has just returned from having her memory restored, and now she doesn't want to forget her time with Sam. In other words, she don't want to delete the kisses. So it seems like extreme physical adrenaline triggers Sam's hallucinations, and this time he sees Emma as a puppet instead of like a SWAT team. And the scene ends with the puppet hand on the glass, a parody of the most famous sex hand on glass shot ever from the movie Titanic. And then we see Kate's teen years when her mom has locked her into her room with a vault door, exactly like the doors that trap the kids in the woods. We see that she was homeschooled, forced into isolation, and no one, not even her mom, would ever touch her. No wonder she fantasizes so much about Soldier Boy. Now, we actually saw this guy briefly during Herogasm, and in the comics, he is a member of the G-Men and a parody of the X-Man, Iceman. Now, in addition to the older posters I mentioned earlier, there's also a newer Queen Maeve poster by her door. Now, this is all not just set dressing, this is showing us what kind of hero, what kind of person Kate wanted to be before Dean Shetty showed up to coerce her into servitude. So this scene where the Dean shows up and offers to help her control her powers is taken straight from the origin of Jean Grey. Now, in the X-Men comics and movies, Jean Grey was an incredibly powerful telepath when she was a child, and she could not stop hearing everyone's voices.
It's very rude, you know, to read my thoughts, or Mr. Lynch's, without our permission.
In the movies, a DH Professor Xavier and Magneto arrived to help her, technically making her the first student in Xavier's school, like in the old non-rebooted continuity, whatever. But Professor Xavier helped her hone her abilities through lessons and discipline. But Dean Shetty does it with a pharmaceutical. This also reflects how mutants in the comics are born naturally, but in this universe, supes get their powers from drugs. It's also a reflection of how oftentimes these days our answer for kids' problems are just to drug them up and sedate them. And then this moment transitions to being on a TV in a classroom, a neat nod to how we have seen a similar scene play out in X-Men movies in the past, but it's also a play on how characters in this school see their lives through the lens of media. They aspire to be like the heroes in their movies, and their social media rankings actually determines their social status.
You're competing with kids who have cleared homicide cases, who have over 1 million followers, and you don't even have an Insta.
So the school is actually teaching these kids that the worst moments in their lives just become stories. And those stories are tools that can be used to manipulate people's emotions and get ahead. Like Stretchy Arm Girl at the Brinks Memorial.
I can't believe this is happening.
Now, the day Kate met Luke, the first thing he says to her is,
"Could I cheat off of you?"
Which is deeply ironic because she cheated on him physically, but also mentally, lying to him about why she was with him for years. In fact, in the Tech Night episode, Kate revealed that her original major was crime fighting because she wanted to be like Maeve and Countess, her heroes. Later on, from overhead, we can see a comic book from a character called Cold Snap, but then she switched to a major in superhero management so she could help Luke with his career. In other words, Shetty and Brinks wanted to control Luke, so they made her change her major so she would always be by his side. Also notice that Luke's shirt has arm bones on it, a neat way to symbolize that Luke is dead, and this is just like a ghost of him or a memory of him speaking. And then he goes all son of Terminator and kills Dusty.
So yeah, it's like Dusty dead?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like Morpheus said,
the body cannot live without the mind.
And then they shift into Jordan's memories, and this scene is where I first noticed that Jordan's necklace is half metal chain and half feminine pearls, symbolizing their bi-gender abilities. And this is where we see that Luke has remembered Sam before, and he almost killed Brinks before. And this explains why Jordan was not at all surprised when Luke flipped out on Brinks in the first episode. This is such a brilliant turn because it shows that Jordan is also carrying guilt. They kept quiet to raise their status and become Brinks' TA. And in return, he kept them in the top 5. Never number 1, but always in the top 5. And later, after Luke dies, the system no longer has any value for them anymore, and they are cast down out of the number 2 spot. Now, I love this entire scene because it gave a chance for the 2 Jordan actors to share the same screen. And we all have conversations where we talk to ourselves, but in this case, it is a self-confrontation, with Jordan grappling with how they really feel about themselves.
You're a coward. And you always will be.
And then we transition into Kate's memory of the woods, when Brinks and Shetty were using Sam's blood to augment his brother's abilities. At least I think that's what's happening. Now, this dynamic is very similar to Scott and Alex Summers in the X-Men comics, aka Cyclops and Havoc. The villain, Mr. Sinister, was obsessed with the Summers DNA, thinking that it had the key to unlocking the mutant race's true potential. He actually ran the orphanage where Scott was raised, and years later he manipulated Scott into marrying a clone of Jean Grey so he could combine their genetic material and create the mutant called Cable. Now here, we see a scientist obsessed with Sam and Luke's DNA, and a villain who manipulated Luke into being with the boys' version of Jean Grey, that's Kate. It seems like what's going on here is that they were building Luke up to be the new leader of the Seven, the new Homelander, but a leader they could control. Sam was the weaker brother, the insane one, so they used his body as basically a blood bag for Luke's. This is also similar to the plot of the film Twins. Now, Luke is played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, son of Arnold, and that movie starred his dad as a genetically altered twin who took his genetic material from his brother, Danny DeVito.
All the purity and strength went into Julius. All the crap that was left over went into what you see in the mirror every morning.
And the really heartbreaking thing about this is, like, we see all the times that Kate has made him forget his brother, but the only time she refused to do this is when Luke thought his brother had died, and she needed him, or no, they needed him to remember the pain.
I think this is something you just have to go through. I'm sorry.
That's messed up.
Yes, it is. I should also point out that all of this battling in the psychic realm is also taken from the X-Men comics, where Xavier would sometimes have these mental battles against another telepath, the villain called the Shadow King. And then we get to this final memory on this guilt trip, the truth about Marie's parents' death. Now, Marie knows that she never wanted her parents dead. She knows that she had no knowledge of her powers, but that is her higher intelligence talking. Deep down, she knows that she reacted that day out of deep anger and embarrassment after they walked in on her.
You were angry that they barged in, and everything that happened because you wanted it to.
We also saw very similar psychotherapy play out in WandaVision, where Agatha forced Wanda to revisit traumatic memories.
You're on the precipice. You are right there.
Yeah, I mean, what is therapy if not a conversation with your younger self?
That's very insightful, Doug. High five. And then we return to Kate's childhood bedroom, the place where all of her lies began, where Dean Shetty walked into her life and gave her her first hug in years. This is where Kate started to use her powers to gain affection from others, which is like a whole other layered sexual subtext that I am not going to get into. So it's fitting that this is also the place where Kate learns that she doesn't have to use her powers to gain trust and friendship. She just needs to be her own true, honest self. And then we get that ending where we see that the virus was just originally meant to inhibit the abilities of supes, but that too much of it can be lethal. This seems like it's based on the legacy virus from the X-Men comics, a disease that was intended as a metaphor for the AIDS crisis in the gay community in the 1980s. Like the legacy virus, this disease was manufactured by an entity looking to control people with powers. It was created by Mr. Sinister, the same villain who was genetically manipulating Scott and Alex Summers. Although it looks like at first this virus in the show is only meant to dampen their powers as a means of control. But then she says,
Now can you make it contagious?
Yeah, why does she do that? Does she want to kill all the supes?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think she wants to create a contagious disease that could kill supes so she can sell them a treatment or a cure, kind of like Chris Rock said.
Hey, Kurt, because ain't no money in the cure. The money's in the medicine.
I mean, we see that this has been her MO for years. Kate is indebted to Dean Shetty because she needs this drug to keep the voices out of her head. And now the Dean wants all supes to be indebted to her to come to her for a cure. Like Stan Edgar told Homelander,
that we are a superhero company. We are not. What we are, really, is a pharmaceutical company.
The real money, the real power in the show and in the real world, the real power comes from controlling people's health and well-being.
They got all the money and all the power, and they want us dead.
And this all ties in perfectly with what's happening in The Boys. In The Boys universe, supes were previously controlled by their desire to be loved and their love of their public image.
Want them to love me. Yahtzee!
But Homelander is breaking free from that. I mean, he just flat out told people that he's better than them.
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better.
He killed a man in broad daylight, and now humans need to find another means of control, and that means is this virus. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Harriet.